Tonight, the title of the message is, Can Sports Lead You to Heaven? Can sports lead you to heaven? Thought about that earlier today? Did you happen to have somebody? I did turn this up a little too far. So maybe over on the gain over there, it might help. So question tonight is, can sports lead you to heaven? How often do we hear things about sports? In fact, this morning I walked in and somebody was saying something about the Colts and Arizona, I think, right? Or something. Was that a game today or something?
Yeah,
okay.
Overtime.
Overtime loss. Okay. For who? The Colts. Okay. All right. Bummer for the Colts, whatever that, I mean, great for Arizona, right?
Yeah, they need something.
Can sports lead you to heaven? Now, let me give a disclaimer real quick, because I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about sports in particular tonight. It's just my springboard, okay? So when somebody hey, did you see the Colts game today? Now, before we talk about that, before we start talking about sports and whatever, I want to just give a disclaimer. The answer to that question, in the most simple and obvious sense, is no. Sports cannot get you to heaven. In fact, it can very much cause problems with you getting to heaven. But we're going to talk about some things here. But if sports are an idol to you, well, that's something that needs to go. But that's not the message tonight. Tonight, I didn't want to spend the night talking about, this is why sports are wrong. No, we're not getting into that. We're just going to take the opportunity when someone says, hey, did you happen to see the game last night or last week or whatever? And you say, I didn't. But when I think about sports, I think about a particular thing. And that particular thing is church. So what? How does sports have anything to do with church? Well, the Bible talks about how the church, and I don't mean the church like some people think, but the church, the assembly of the saints, local, the church is one body. And they have one goal and one task. They have a singular, unified vision and mark that they're pressing toward, a mission that they're trying to accomplish, and they have to work together, just like any sports team has to work together if they're going to win. Now, sometimes you have a situation where you'll have one superstar player. But without the rest of the players, that superstar player is nothing. Superstar player cannot do the whole thing. He can't actually carry the team on his back. We'll say, for example, you have a superstar quarterback, since somebody mentioned Colts. Somebody mentioned Colts this morning, and so I brought it up. But so you have a superstar quarterback. I don't even know who the Colts quarterback is anymore. Andrew Luck. Okay. All right. See, shows how much we know. Nobody knows who. Anyways, back in the day, who was that one guy that was Peyton Manning? There you go. So he was a superstar quarterback. But let me say something. Without the rest of the team, guess what? That quarterback would be throwing the ball into an empty field full of his enemies or his opponents. Yes. So the team has to work together, right? And in church, now we're going to get into the gospel and things as well, but in church, and this is something that you have the opportunity. Somebody's brought up sports. My goodness, how often do people bring up sports? Every day. You know what? I go into the gym and I go in there and I'll do my workout, all that stuff, and then I'm coming back and I'm getting, ready for the day, and I look up and I see this TV. And you know what's going on that TV? Sports. I guess it's ESPN. I don't know. You got sports. They're talking about such and such coach or such and such player or this team or that team, and these guys did well and those guys didn't do so well, and all this stuff. Sports. Now it's a little awkward to talk in the locker room because people are trying to get dressed and things. So I don't do that much. But every once in a while, like a guy came over to me. In fact, I was in the sauna and the Lord prompted me to give my testimony to this guy. And so I was like, Lord, it's kind of hot in here. If I give my testimony, I'm going to be in here too long. I'm going to get sick or something. And he's like, come on. So I shared my testimony with him, and then he shared his testimony, and I don't know if he's saved or not, but at least I did what the Lord wanted me to do. But he came to me while I was just about to walk out, and he was getting his gym stuff ready and whatever, and he says, "Hey, you're that preacher, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah." And I think I gave him, I don't remember, but I think we talked about some other things, and I told him what I was doing that day, and gave him told him he can swing by, if he wants to sometime for service. But anyways, sports going on up there on the TV, and it's easy though when somebody says, "Oh, you hear about such and such or whatever." I generally don't have time for sports. Not to say that I'm completely and totally against watching a game once in a while, as long as it doesn't get take the time that you should be using for something else. I mean, in and of itself, I don't see an issue necessarily. Depends on what you're seeing. And I'm somewhat ignorant about that because I generally just don't have time. So I can't tell you what you would see if you watched it or what you wouldn't see. So some people will point out, well, you don't want to watch it because you'd see this or you'd see that. And maybe what I don't know. So I'm just ignorant of that fact, and so, or of whatever they might say. So, and of course, I'm not going to get all wrapped up in it, but there's a reason. I generally don't have time for that because I have to dedicate a lot of time to, or I don't have to, but I need to dedicate, and I get to dedicate a lot of my attention, effort, and energy into the team that God's placed me in. And that's this team, Fountain Square Baptist Church. Who's our opponent? The devil, right? Not that we're trying to play games with the devil. We're not in any way trying to play games with the devil. We're just trying to win souls before it's eternally too late. In the book of Ephesians, chapter 5, if you want to turn over there, the book of Ephesians. Chapter 5. This is where, and so I think about church. Now, let me back up for a second and talk about teamwork for just a second here. We're going to talk about it as we go through here. Some people believe that their service to God is about them, or about, I get to serve God, I get to do this, I. But our service to God in the church, or first of all, our service to God is in the church or as the church reaching the world, but as a vital piece of that church. Nobody in the church is their own. They're not an island. Yeah. We're not all on our own. It is a body knit together, as we're going to see in chapter 4 of Ephesians. But in let's look at chapter 4 actually first before we look at chapter 5. He says in chapter 4, and let's look at. We'll just start at the beginning. I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you that you walk worthy of the vocation wherewith ye are called. The vocation. What vocation do you have? What's he talking about here? He's not talking about the job you have in your in the world, but the vocation. He says, with all lowliness and meekness, with long suffering, forbearing one another in love. So wait a minute. So he's talking about vocation in the context of being connected to one another in the church. If you look at the context of the book, Ephesians is a church book. It's written so that a church knows how to interact with one another and work together as a team. But he goes on, he says, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. So we're going to be at peace with one another, of course, and unified. Why? For there is, he says, there is one body, and that one body relates to the one you're a part of. It's not just, this is where a lot of people go to Ephesians and they'll say, see, one body all over the world. No, it applies right here. There is one body. You can only be a member of one church. You can't be jumping around. Now, you may be a missionary with a mission from your church to another church to help that church. That's fine if your church is okay with that, if that's the direction that your church believes that you're supposed to be headed. But there's one body and one Spirit, even as you're called in one hope of your calling. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in you all. Now, I'm not going to go back through and preach a whole message on each one of those ones. But the idea here is we have unity in the church, that we have one beginning. We have, it's one body. It's one Spirit, one Lord, one faith that we're unified on, one baptism. In other words, there's only one kind of baptism. There's only one way into the church through baptism. I'm not talking about some mystical whatever. We're talking about the church, the assembly of the saints. One God, one Father of all. So we have this unified mission, a unified Savior, a unified Lord or leader. And then he says, but unto every one of us is given grace according to the measure of the gift of Christ. Wherefore he saith, when he ascended up on high, he led captivity captive and gave gifts unto men. Now he that ascended, what is it? But that he also descended first in the lower parts of the earth. He that descended is the same also that ascended up far above all heavens, that he might fulfill all things. So he gave gifts unto men. He gave some apostles and some prophets and some evangelists and some pastors and teachers. Why? For the perfecting of the saints, for the work of the ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ. How long? Till we all come in the unity of the faith. What does this tell us, though? Verse number 13 here. What does this tell us? It tells us that it's not just about these MVPs here. The apostles and prophets and evangelists and pastors and teachers. It's further, God gives these leaders to do their job so that we all, every one of us, come in the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God unto a perfect man. Singular. Not talking about you a perfect man, or you a perfect man, or you a perfect man, but us a perfect man. We all a perfect man. It says, unto the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, that we henceforth be no more children, tossed to and fro, and carried about with every wind of doctrine, by the sleight of men and cunning craftiness, whereby they lie in wait to deceive, but speaking the truth in love, may grow up unto him in all things, which is the head, even Christ, from whom the whole body, fitly joined together and compacted by that which every joint supplieth, according to the effectual working in the measure of every part, maketh increase of the body unto the edifying of itself in love. Now that sounds like a whole lot of stuff, doesn't it? But that verse right there kind of sums all that up. He talks about that we're growing up in him, in Christ, our head, right? And our head is the one from whom the whole body, fitly joined together and compacted. In other words, we're so joined together that we're compacted together. We're not going to come apart. We're stuck together. But stuck together, how? By that which every joint supplieth. In other words, we have members. Now, we're going to look at 1 Corinthians 12. But we have members. Y'all know what this member is?
Your finger.
Which one?
Index.
It's my index finger or pointer finger, right? That's one member. There's another member. Guess what? If I break this one off, does this one care?
No.
Yeah, it does. Oh, yeah, it does. Because guess what? This hand's not going to be working very well because of that member being hurt. And so this hand has to take up the difference over time. And so this finger has to do more because of this finger being hurt. This member hurts. This member has to do more. He feels the pain. Maybe not the direct pain, but he feels the pain because he has to take up for the slack of the hurt member. Or if it's my pinky toe. Man, they're a long way apart. From there to here is 8 feet.
Didn't stand up with that big toe.
Yeah. I've seen seen where, people have problems with their feet or their legs or whatever. They can't walk. You better believe that your hands know what's going on with your feet. I'm not saying your hands have brains and stuff, all right? You get the point, though. Each member is attached to that same body. Unless there's something weird going on and you have no feeling, like there's some abnormal difference where one part can't tell what the other part's, what's going on with the other part. But we recognize, though, that the whole body works together. But we're not just members separately. We are members in particular, but we're jointed together. Notice how this member has multiple parts that joint it together. Maybe even smaller members, like you have this part and that part and that part, all members of their own, jointed together by other members. And then we all have, so what I'm getting to here is that the church, and this, this may be now, I'm spending a lot of time on this because we have a church here to talk to, but when we're on the street, we can just summarize it and say, the church works as a team. The Bible says that's the way it's supposed to happen. And then we could talk about who the church is and why the church is important. But for the sake of the church that's here tonight, I want to mention that we cannot do the work of God alone. We absolutely cannot. And it's not a matter of our abilities necessarily, although it is. We may think that we have the ability to do so, but we cannot. We have to have the support of our body, the rest of our body. That would be like my my elbow running off and trying to prepare for the sermon tonight all by itself.
That's creepy.
That would be crazy, wouldn't it? Or it would be kind of creepy, You see this elbow over there, you're like, there's not even an arm attached to that elbow. What's it doing over there?
Just hanging out.
And it's just sitting there on the pew because it can't move to turn the pages in the Bible. Or maybe I'm trying to prepare for the sermon tonight, and both of my elbows say, I ain't doing it. I got other stuff that's more important. I'm just going to hang out over here, and I'm not going to work. Well, what happens when my elbows do that?
You're right.
What can my hands do? I can do this, see? I can turn. But we got some like some things going through your elbows. I could try to, okay, I'm going to turn the page here. How am I going to turn the page? It's not going to be real easy. It's going to take me a while to study. Why? Because one member said, I'm not going to be a part of that. Isn't that kind of funny to think? Why would my elbow rebel against me? It wouldn't. Well, I'd have to bend my elbows, wouldn't I? I would, see? Or maybe my left hand says, I ain't working today. So I got to do my right hand. I got to do everything with my right hand. Well, what happens? One member affects the whole mission. One member affects the whole mission. And then people say things like, oh, I don't need to go to church to. Because see, that's the very first thing that's going to come out of the mouth of the person you're talking to when you say, sports reminds me of church. Reminds me of the church. They say, oh, I don't, I know that you don't have to go to church to go to heaven. That's true. You don't have to go to church to go to heaven. You don't even have to be a member of a church to go to heaven. But you have to be saved to go to heaven. And you're not going to be anything of any use to God without being a part of a church. Church is very important. Often people say, oh, I can miss, as long as I make it to, half of the games. By the way, this isn't where the game takes place. This is the training. Our church services. See, some people just want to do the game part. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to preach the gospel. I'm not going to be a part of the practice, though. I'm not going to be a part of the training. I'm not going to be a part of the prep work. I'm just going to go on my own and do it. I'll do my own prep work. I'm not going to go to practice. I'm not going to go to anybody play sports before? Okay, how many times do you go to practice a week? Usually, if you're gonna play a game on Saturday, how many days from Monday to Saturday are you going to practice? 4 or 5. Okay, right? Let's say I say to my coach, Lord, you get the point, right? I say to my coach, I say, you know what? I got other things to do. I'll study my part at home. I'll watch, other people doing it, and I'll practice it all by myself. And I'll be here for the game on Saturday. So how's that going to work? It's not going to work. Well, with a sports game, they can just grab somebody else and say, all right, you're the tight end this time. Now, come on. And then when you show up for the game, guess what happens? You got a nice seat right over there on the bench for you. Have a seat. You didn't practice. You weren't a part of the practice drills. You're not going to be a part of the game. Don't know the game plan. The other people don't know how to work with you because you weren't here to practice working with them. And so how do we actually accomplish what we're trying to accomplish with one that's not going to play their part? We don't. And this is the same for church as well. I can't just say, all right, Lord, I'm going to study my Bible at home, and I'm just going to do your Great Commission on my own. I'll go and I'll knock on people's doors and I'll preach to them. I'll go out on the street corners and preach, and I'll go to nursing homes and preach, and I'll go to the hospitals and witness to people in the hospitals, and I'll go and I'll and then I'll when they get saved, I'll baptize them myself. With what authority? My own, of course. God give me the authority. Wrong. And I'll disciple them myself. I'll do it all myself. It'll work. It's just a perfect plan, right? No. No. We need our training sessions. We need our time working together. And then, by the way, yes, we do have a responsibility to do things on our own too. However, so like for example, what do they tell you when you're getting ready for a game? What do they tell you to do throughout the week on your own? You played football. Okay, read your playbook. What else? Get enough sleep. Eat right, right? What do they tell you the night before the game? Go out and what do they tell you to do? What they told me to do, not the night before the game, but the day before the game, they say, what do they tell you to eat for dinner? Did they tell you to eat anything particular for dinner? Spaghetti. That's exactly what they told me when I played football. I only played for 2 years, but they said, make sure you eat spaghetti the night before the game. Not the night before, but the day before. Why? Energy, right? Have a right amount of energy. Not that that's like particularly correlates, but you had to do that on your own, right? So, and you had to what else did you have to do on your own? Drink water. If you only drank water when you were at the practice, what happens? You're dehydrated. You dehydrate during the practice. You dehydrate during the game. You dehydrate all the rest of the time too. So on your own, you have to hydrate, right? So when it comes to our church, of course, we have to be here for the practice. Maybe not the best word. We have to be here for the training. But then we have to take the training and we have to hydrate with the water of the word throughout the week. We have to eat the bread of life throughout the week. We have to be in contact with the coach. He's not just the coach. He's our head. He's our Lord. But we have to be in contact. Now, some people, they're going to probably watch this. I probably already have some mean comments on there. No. All right. So some people may watch this and they're going to say, what in the world? How could you possibly try to equate the Lord's holy church with a game? I'm not equating. Okay. I'm just looking at some of the similarities. All right. The church is not the same as a game. But a game or a sports team reminds me of a church because we're a team and we have to work together in order to accomplish the Great Commission of reaching the lost, joining them to the church, and discipling them, training them. And so he gives us that illustration again in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. Verse number 12, it says, for as the body is one, and hath many members, and all the members of that one body, being many, are one body, so also is Christ. So again, here in this passage, who's he talking to? Church members. What church? No. We're in 1 Corinthians. The church at Corinth, right? Now notice at the first chapter of the book of 1 Corinthians, second verse, he says, unto the church of God which is at Corinth. Particularly talking to them. Then he says, for by one Spirit are we all baptized into one body, whether we be Jews or Gentiles, whether we be bond or free, and have been made to drink into one Spirit. Don't misunderstand that verse. He's talking about the body you're baptized into. If you remember here, this is the body you're baptized into. You're baptized into McGregor Road. You guys, East Valley, is that what it is? Okay. And so it's the particular church that you're a member of. You've been baptized into that body. How? By deep water immersion. Amen. Otherwise, it wasn't really a body to begin with. So whether, and no matter what our background is, we're a part of that body. For the body is not one in number. Sorry, not one member. The body is not one member, but many. There's your answer if you're ever wondering how big should a church be before they become a church. Well, they have to be many. What's that number? more than one. This is not one member, but many. If the foot shall say, because I am not the head, I am not of the body. I have to have that role. I can't be the foot. I have to be the head. Is it therefore not of the body? If the whole body were an eye, where were the hearing? If the whole were hearing, where were the smelling? But now hath God set the members, every one of them in the body, as it hath pleased him. And if they were all one member, where were the body? But now are ye many members, yet but one body. And the eye cannot say unto the hand, I have no need of you. Right? We already gave the illustration, right? I have no need of thee. Nor again the head unto the feet, I have no need of you. Oh, yeah, you do. Without feet, the head's going to hit the ground pretty hard. You can't keep balance very well on nubs. Then he says here, he says, nay, much more are those members, or much more those members of the body which seem to be more feeble are necessary. And those members of the body which we think to be less honorable, upon these we bestow more abundant honor. And our uncomely parts have more abundant comeliness. For our comely parts have no need, but God hath tempered the body together, having given more abundant honor to that part which lacked. But there should be no schism in the body, but that the members should have the same care one for another. And whether one member suffer, all the members suffer with it. Or one member be honored, all the members rejoice with it. Now ye are the body of Christ, and members in particular. And that's the particular church that you're a part of. And we all have a part. And if you're not part of a church, or if God's leading you to be a part of a church, you need to nail that down and be a part. But after I went into all that, that was for you guys, that was for us. But here's the part that you begin to work the gospel in. You say, I look at sports teams and I notice one thing about them, that they cannot operate without working together, right? They can't do well without working together. They have to work together. And a lot of people think that church isn't important, that the church services aren't important. But they don't realize, or being a part of a church isn't important, but they don't realize that the common mission of Christianity is only accomplished, biblical Christianity is only accomplished by God's churches working, not together as churches, but working together, the members working together as one church, doing what they're trying to accomplish, and then another church doing what they're supposed to be accomplishing. They work together as a team. And I just notice how important that particular team is, that particular type of team is, the church, to God. Some people say, well, church isn't that important. Well, what they mean by that is the church service isn't that important. Okay, now they may also mean that the members aren't that important either, but in Ephesians chapter 5, verse number 25, I'm just going to skip to this. It says, husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it. How could we think that the church isn't that important when the God of the universe, the Son of God, left heaven and came to earth to give himself for the church? It's important. In fact, I would say that it is more important than anything else on the planet. Period. People say, what? the church is more important than anything else? Yes, it is. Now, I'm not saying the church, quote unquote, church services are more important or this or whatever, but the church is so important that the Son of God gave himself for it. And that he loves it so much that he died for the church. And then, not only that, but he continues to work in the church to sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of the water by the word, that he might present it to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that it should be holy and without blemish. You see, he says here, talking about the husband and the wife and things, he says, this is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. The point that he's making here is that Christ loves the church. He loved the church so much to give himself for it, and he continues to love the church by cleaning her, caring for her, providing, right? What is it? Sanctify and cleanse, so that, no spot, no wrinkle, or any such thing, holy and without blemish. And what else? As it says in verse number 28, so ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. He that loveth his wife loveth himself. For no man ever yet hated his own flesh, but nourisheth and cherisheth it, even as the Lord the church. You guys think about that for a second. Think about the fact that the Lord loves the church so much that he died for the church. He brought her into existence and then died for her. And then he nourishes and cherishes her. What does it mean to nourish? To feed. He feeds her. He provides for her and cherishes. What does it mean to cherish something? You hold it in such regard that it is important to you. It is cherished. It's everything to you. When people say, "Oh, church isn't that important," we'll see, brother. Have a good time at work. When people say church isn't important or isn't that important, I say, wait a minute. The church is very important. Jesus died for the church. Now, he died for the individuals as well, but particularly here he talks about he died for the church. What does he do now? That just because you're not particularly a member of a church does not mean that he didn't die for you. He died for all, but he only died for one. I don't want to say organization, but he only died for one assembly, or one type of assembly, so to speak, and it is the biblical New Testament church. He died for the church. Now, again, don't misunderstand that I'm trying to say that the church is like some, universal thing, but he died for the church. He died for this church, and he died for McGregor Road. And what does he do after he died and he rose again? So that we might have life and so that we might be born again and then added to the church, added to the membership of a local church through baptism. And then he, through the body, he then nourishes us individually. And in so doing, he nourishes the body. He nourishes the whole, the bride. And then he cherishes her. And I can't really think of anything else really in the universe that's spoken of in such a light and with such importance before God.
Intercedes too, maybe.
He prays for us individually. Yeah. So then you get into now. I just made it all. That was a big church message for everybody, right? But how does that go to the gospel? You have sports teams and you have teamwork and the church, and I'm just giving you the church version, and then you take that and you bring it to basic summary. You say just as a sports team has to work together, church works together. And you know what? When I think about the church, I'm reminded that Christ thought that the church was so important that he came to earth. He was born of a virgin. He fulfilled all of the prophecies that he was supposed to fulfill for that first coming of his. And then he came. He began when he walked by the seaside and he said, "Follow me." And he began to build his church. And as he said, "Upon this rock," speaking of himself, "I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." And he did that. He built his church. And then he died for her. But he died for all. And some people will say, "Oh, he died for the church, and so therefore you had to be a member of a church in order to be saved." No. That's not what he's saying here. He died for the church, yes. But as you study the rest of the New Testament, you're going to find that he died so that, as Titus chapter 2 says, that the grace of God that bringeth salvation, right, appears to all, right? We all have the opportunity. We all get to see. It says, "For the grace of God that bringeth salvation hath appeared to all men." So we all have the opportunity to be born again. And then we all have the opportunity to join a church now and be a part of the team. Because, by the way, God doesn't save us so that we can just go to heaven. And if you don't like the church, you'll hate heaven. You'll hate it. Guess what happens like the first 7 years we're there? Got a big marriage at the end of that first 7 years. And then we get to see everybody else, that's judged and all that, and we get to greet the family of God, and Christ and the church are married, and the bride there, and then we have all of this, and all of eternity is about Christ and his bride, and then of course the family of God is included, right? We have the Old Testament saints and those that were saved that were never part of a scriptural church. They're all able to be there, but they may be looking on from the distance saying, "Man, I wish I would have been a part of that. I missed out on something there." Because there's a whole lot that you get to be a part of here today. And then there's a whole lot that there's a whole lot that you get to see. Now, I'm not saying that there's two different classes or anything like that in heaven. But yes, there's reward when we get to heaven. We're rewarded for what we do or don't do in the church. Don't get me wrong. Some people will say, "Oh, Baptist brighter." Depends on your definition. But I just told you, there will be some people that aren't in the church that will be in heaven. It's true. As long as you're in the family of God, as long as you've been born again. But you don't want to miss out on being a part of the team. By the way, the teams never should be competing against one another. We actually work together under one kingdom I don't know how you liken that. I don't know if maybe there's like a particular league of teams that never fight against each other, and then they're always going against another group of teams. But I don't know. Maybe you liken that to the Olympics or something, right? You going against another country, but we're all in the same, we're all American, right? I don't know. See, that's where the analogy really just starts breaking down and falling apart, and it just doesn't work anymore. So obviously, when we're talking about the church being a team and all that, no, we're not a team that goes up against another team. Like, okay, our church, we're going to go up against, we're going to go up against McGregor Rover. Let's see how we do. Now, there may be some friendly competition that we might do sometimes. I've seen churches do that where they've had like, let's have a visitation competition. Now, visitation, you got to be careful about that, by the way, because then you end up with like numbers that are inflated and false professions and all that kind of stuff. But you can have a competition in terms of the number of people you were able to talk to, but you don't really want to compete on particular, like, because we don't control, conviction and all that stuff. But we're not at odds with one another. Our church and another church, we're not. As long as they're scriptural churches, we're not at odds with one another. But if it's an unscriptural church, then the head of that, by default, we talk about, the Pharisees, who was their father, Jesus said. They said Abraham was their father, but he said, no, you are of your father, the devil. Those that preach another Christ are of their father, the devil. And so those other churches, quote unquote churches, those other institutions are not, they're not the same. They're not on the same team. They're of their father, the devil. Now, we're not actually fighting them particularly. We're just fighting for the souls of men, trying to reach them with the gospel before it's too late. By the way, it may be too late this afternoon for some people. Here we are tonight, and it's too late for some people because they're already dead. They died this afternoon. We could have had the opportunity, but we didn't take it. Right? When we say before it's too late, we're not just talking about, before the end of the world happens here in a few days, right? The 23rd, I think, is supposed to be. Y'all let me know how that goes.
Well, it was also supposed to end last month during the eclipse.
Man, I've been through the end of the world so many times. Isn't it amazing? Anyways, so we can take sports. And although the basic, simplest answer of can sports lead you to heaven, the basic answer is no. Although, if you follow the line of logic that points you to the Bible, when you see the teamwork, and then you look at the church and you see the teamwork, and then you look at the importance of the church and how Christ died for, and then you look at the fact that Christ died for the church, and then he died for all men so that we could be saved from our sin and the penalty of it. If you follow that line of reasoning, or if you start a conversation with me about sports and I point you to the gospel, sports may have led you to the opportunity to go to heaven because I give you the gospel. Now, man, that's kind of some jumping through some hoops, but what topic can you bring up that can't be turned somehow there?